Hi, you've reached a holiday edition of the Signal Watch. I'm your Yuletide host, Ryan Steens. For some holiday cheer, join me in our chorus of co-contributors as we give the gift of holiday movie discussion, talking films both nice and, less nice. We'll examine Christmassy artifacts of the 20th century, merrily explore the 21st, and try to put it all in peppermint perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this jolly. Happy holidays and welcome back to the Signal Watch. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens, and with me today is
Marshall Preddy. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm Christmassy as heck here in the middle of November.
Yeah.
I got the Hallmark Channel on my YouTube TV.
Yep, same.
So I'm watching young people realize big city life is not for them as they retreat to small town, snowy places to date their high school boyfriend again. But I watched Scrooged, which was our selection this week.
Yeah, Scrooge is kind of the anti-Christmas movie. I mean, if you in terms of like all of the tropes that we typically see in most Christmas movies, Scrooge is even though of course it's based on the classic A Christmas Carol, the Dickens Christmas Carol. It is a very different kind of Christmas movie.
Yeah, it's funny. I want to say before we get going, this is the second time we've tried to do a Scrooged podcast. The first one
take me to that,
yeah. The first time I lost it. Jamie and I had done one. I wasn't really happy with how it turned out, and then I was like, well, I'll just post it like later in the year instead of during the Christmas season. And then my hard drive crashed. So you're doing me a huge favor picking this movie. Second of all, I was doing some reading before we met up, and this movie actually took some real critical hits when it came out.
It did.
Which I had no memory of that being true.
I didn't either, but it came out in 1988 and I was still relatively young. I saw it in the theater. I loved it in the theater. I mean, I loved it. It's still probably based on that memory. It was one of my favorite holiday movies of all time. And then I showed it to my son last year. We watched that one and the Patrick Stewart one back to back.
Ooh.
And
that should have been a podcast.
But that was just me and my son. It was last Christmas. We just had some time and we watched them back to back. And then I watched it then for this movie. And of course, I've done some background reading on it too. I did not realize it was excoriated. It got some really polarizing reviews. And I would say they either were sort of in the middle on it, or you look at Roger Ebert, who just thought this movie was like mean-spirited and tone-deaf and just a complete train wreck. And as you say, I mean, I watched this movie. Of course, this was in a historic run from Bill Murray. He was still at the peak of his powers. I don't think he had done a movie in like 4 years, but then he continued from this to do. I mean, this was part of the Bill Murray in his prime. After Ghostbusters, after this, he does. What About Bob? He does Groundhog Day. There's like. He just had an enormous career run there, even with the 4-year interruption, which is kind of unassailable. And of course he's fantastic in this movie. So to me at the time, and I wasn't, I was young, and I forget what I was in 88. I guess I was 14. I wasn't reading a lot of criticism. So I was just watching the movies as they came out. My family and I, we went to see this movie. I loved it. It's great. And it does everything I want a movie to do, which was, it makes you feel good. A Christmas movie, it makes you feel good at the end. It hit all the same beats of a classic, of a Christmas Carol classic, and just felt exuberant and very Christmassy at the end. Which, I mean, we can talk about it. You can talk about how well earned that ending is, but to me, in spite of all the movie's flaws, and we'll get to this, I still feel good about the ending. I still feel like it is inspiring. It is exhilarating, but probably also a little crazy, and or a lot crazy, actually.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that. But I when I was a kid, what I remember feeling was I did not feel any of the. I did not have second thoughts about it. I did not have I was not iffy on it. I was 100% behind this movie, and I really didn't feel the darkness in it the way I do. I mean, now it's obvious, and now it's even you could read it. You could do a very cynical reading of this movie, and I think we should sort of look at it and talk about that. What's in it, even maybe to the point of undermining the ending and taking a different look at what's really happening.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, we'd all seen multiple versions of Christmas Carol. By the time I saw this in the theater, it would be another year before I'd read the book. I think I don't think I had read the book yet. Sorry, there's a helicopter flying directly over my house, which is usually not some problem I have during the podcast.
I'm not hearing it.
Oh, okay, good. So. Right. But yeah, so I don't think I'd read the book yet at this point, but I had, I from one of my earliest memories, literally, is the storybook record of Christmas Carol with Mickey Mouse. And it was, the original, whatever weird Scrooge that Disney had that wasn't quite Scrooge McDuck, but was Scrooge McDuck. Mm-hmm. And so that is baked in is of three ghosts plus Marley, of how I think of Christmas. And one of the things that when you read have you ever read the novella or the book?
I have. No, I have read it. I read it before. Excuse me. I read this. My parents had bought, I think it's Sam's Club or something like that. They bought me a Dickens collection.
Oh, wow.
And I was 12 and I read it there. I read that whole collection. And so I loved it. And I had not seen that many adaptations. I think I had seen the Henry Winkler one. And
there's a Henry Winkler one?
Yes, there is. There's a Henry Winkler, a Christmas Carol adaptation. And I mentioned I'd seen the Patrick Stewart one that came much later. That's excellent in terms of that one really closely hews to the book.
Yes.
So that one's really good. And then I had seen a black and white version, and I'm going to be terrible for our podcast listeners. There's an old version of it.
There is, and they show it briefly in this.
Yes. Movie. And I had seen that version too.
Yeah.
I was a big Dickens fan as a kid, as I say kid, as a young preteen or whatever, 12, 14. I was way into Dickens. And so, I really liked A Christmas Carol. This is probably my favorite of the Dickens stuff.
Yeah, I cannot claim I was fanboying Charles Dickens. I don't think I read anything that was his, aside from Tale of Two Cities.
Great Expectations.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I read David Copperfield. Is where my brain is fritzing out.
Those are the ones. Those are the three other ones. I don't want to act like I'm some sort of Dickens scholar.
Hey man, if you were a public school kid in Texas and reading Dickens on your own, you'd well overtaken everybody else. But yeah, so I remember going to see this in the theater with my family. Well, I saw it with my friend Jeff and my parents, and my memory of it is we saw it at the Round Rock 8, which in a tiny little theater. And at the end, when he's doing the this half of the theater and all that, people were singing along.
Yes.
We were fully in on what was happening on screen. Like people were clapping and singing and laugh, and right up to the point where he like brushes the letters off his chest at the very end when they do that part of the titles. People were in. And if you've read the book, this is to the audience, Marshall clearly has. It's a ghost story. And there's this tradition, and we talked about this a little bit in the Muppet Christmas Carol podcast, but there's a tradition of Victorian ghost stories for Christmas. Like Dickens isn't the only one who did this. This is kind of what they used to do. It was dark, and it was, the days were ending early, and people would go back to their homes and they'd read, from whatever the penny magazines where they were buying. People were writing these kind of spooky stories that took place at this time of the year. And that's kind of where Dickens jumped off on for what he was doing. I have a collection of them I bought last Christmas. I never got around to reading, which I'm going to start next week. So I can actually have read them by Christmas this year. But I find it really fascinating because one of the things that in the criticism of this movie in those bad reviews was, well, it's scary and dark. And I'm like, well, have you read Christmas Carol? It's scary and dark.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't really know. I mean, I kind of consider this to be a lot of what Bill Murray was doing from Ghostbusters on. He's not Gen X, but I consider this stuff to kind of be Gen X media. We're fine with things having tones that pop around and reference other media.
Yeah.
And are super freaking cynical. I mean, this is coming out back to back with RoboCop.
RoboCop is actually in my notes, but this is very of that kind of the like you say, the visual references and the cynicism and that kind of humor, where it's very gallows humor, quick reference. It's sort of a cynical. Airplane was the other movie that I was thinking about in the sense of the stunt casting and the sort of tone, except it's not as earnest as Airplane. It's funny to think about Airplane. Airplane is all about the gags, whereas we look at RoboCop, it's dystopian. Mm-hmm. And that is what this movie This movie has a lot of that very dystopian humor, sort of sending up late era capitalism, which, if you read Dickens, that's all in there. I mean, it's very much about, this sort of like, it's very much a criticism of capitalism and a focus on making money over an industry over people. And this is hitting all those same beats. And I think that sometimes, even though it's explicit in the text of A Christmas Carol, sometimes that gets glossed over. It's like, whereas like, I think sometimes that gets, I don't want to say glossed over, but you read it as an indictment of Scrooge rather than as an indictment of society. Whereas I think the novella Christmas Carol, and certainly in this adaptation, it isn't Scrooge, Bill Murray's character isn't, Frank Cross. He's not the only one. He's a symptom of a larger society. And you see that, and that is, it's not just an indictment of him, but it's an indictment of the larger media and business landscape.
If you'll allow me, I'm going to quickly do a synopsis for Michael Bell, who has requested
do it
this
for our friend. Even though everybody knows the plot of this.
Michael gets very lost and confused, and we're just doing this for him. We're not doing it for you, other audience members.
That's right. Only Michael Bell. This, in fact, is the Michael Bell segment where we summarize the plot.
So leaping off from Christmas Carol, this movie stars Bill Murray as Frank Cross, who is the youngest president ever at the IBC network, which is supposed to be basically ABC, NBC, CBS. And as we're days away from Christmas Eve, when he is going to be launching a live version of Christmas Carol with scenes from around the world, including the blessing of the entire Zulu nation. Anyway, getting back to Marshall talking about how cynical and like weird that this thing is, but he is visited instead of Marley, by the ghost of his former friend and the former president of the IBC network, who warns him that, mankind should have been his business. And then he's visited then by the three ghosts, who are played by David Johansen, who you may know as Buster Poindexter, or part of, oh my God,
New York Dolls.
I almost said the Manhattan Dolls, and I was like, it's not the Manhattan Dolls.
It's not the Manhattan Dolls. The New York. He was the singer, right?
Yeah.
The New York Dolls singer.
Yeah, I just totally blanked. I apologize to all of you. And then Carol Kane, and then a big puppet. And it also co-stars Bobcat Goldthwait, Alfre Woodard as Bob Cratchit, who kind of both play Bob Cratchit.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that. There's two Bob Cratchits in this movie.
And it has, who else? Oh, Karen Allen plays Claire here, who is the stand-in for Belle. And who else is, there's other many, Doyle brothers, all the Murray brothers are in it, in various roles. So
yeah.
Anyway,
Robert Mitchum. I mean, there's a lot of this cast, is cast is insane.
Oh, not Donald Glover, John Glover, who plays the sleazebag from California.
Mm-hmm.
And I love John Glover. This is the first thing I ever saw him in, and I was like, that guy is brilliant.
Mm-hmm. John Forsythe is Lou Hayward, who is the Jacob Marley stand-in.
So it's a crazy all-star cast, directed by Richard Donner, who did Superman, of course, but also around this point, the Lethal Weapon movies. And I'm trying to think of who else. I'm trying to think of who else pops up in the film, but it really is kind of this like round robin of people just kind of walking through who you kind of recognize their face if you're around in the 80s. Yeah,
absolutely.
Go for it. You said you have a bunch of notes. I don't.
I do have a bunch of notes, and I want to talk about. So I think overwhelmingly, I think what we wanted to talk about for sure is the criticism of this movie is that it's tonally all over the place, that it's too cynical, that it's hyper violent, and that it sort of loses the plot with respect to Christmas spirit. And I think all of those things are kind of true, except the last one. We can debate that. But it is tonally all over the place. So there's some points that the criticism made. I mean, I love this movie. I still love this movie. It is tonally all over the place. It is hyper violent. It is very cynical. And we can argue about whether Frank Cross is really redeemed by the end of it, and B, whether he deserves that redemption. So you could talk about all of those things, and we should. But I kind of want to start because I think you can go out there and read all the criticisms of this movie. I think this movie gets a lot right. And so where I want to start is what I really, really love about this movie. And I think the first thing is that it is an incredibly well done satire of 80s era American TV media culture. It really is well done, and I want to start there because that's where the movie begins. We begin with like this sort of like there's a bunch of movie within the movie type stuff, but we start with a promo of IBC's "The Night the Reindeer Died," where Santa's workshop in the North Pole is attacked for reasons. We don't know why it's attacked, but it's attacked by commandos coming in, and Lee Majors, who, and I know I'm going to have to, Lee Majors was a huge star. Like it would be weird to like communicate how big a star Lee Majors was in the 70s and 80s. I think his last major television role was as the Fall Guy, a stuntman in an 80s television show, but he was huge. And you see Lee Majors as sort of like a Bruce Willis kind of diehard action figure coming in to save the day. And it is hilarious. It is spot on. It's like, it is it's a little over the top, but it's not unimaginable for there to be a movie where Santa's under siege and he has to be bailed out by a mercenary commando who's trying to redeem himself, which is basically the movie that sets that up. But there's some other great promos that are set up, including a Robert Goulet's Old-Fashioned Cajun Christmas, which is not that far off when you look at the commercial for that of a real Christmas special that NBC did. Do you know the one I'm talking about, Ryan?
I just remember the Christmas specials of the era.
Yeah,
it nothing about it rang false.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And then there was a Leave It to Beaver sort of Christmas reboot called Father Loves Beaver, which has like just like, where's Wally walks in and June says, I don't know, he's probably around somewhere chasing beaver. That was like the idea, the conceit in this little set of promos that opens the movie is you're really getting a sense for the IBC network as run by the youngest president in network TV history, Frank Cross. This is his network. This is what he's putting on the air. And it's very cynical. It's very funny. But the idea is an indictment, not just of the network, but of America in general as them being, this is what the country is swallowing. This is essentially what they want. And that's before you get to the movie within a movie, which for this network actually seems kind of traditional. It is basically a live, again, very on the nose for what NBC has done for years in their live action things, is sort of build basically an elaborate and expensive high school play of well-known IP, and build that out and show that and put that on live to America, just like they did with Peter Pan and some other recent movies. But that was very popular in the 80s too. And so you see that they set up the movie within a movie. This is going to be a reboot. The Bill Murray movie that we're watching, Scrooge, is a reboot of A Christmas Carol, and so is Scrooge, the Christmas Carol reboot that the IBC network is putting on. That has its own all-star cast in it.
Yeah, Jamie Farr, John Houseman. I'm trying to remember. That's how I wasn't thinking of who else was in this movie, but.
Mary Lou Retton as Tiny Tim.
Yes.
It's an incredible joke that the movie doubles down on by getting actually Mary Lou Retton as Tiny Tim in the movie. There's a lot of stunt casting here, and that's what I mean when I say the movie's it's very definitely these sort of like the night the reindeer died. It's very RoboCop in its cynicism and its satire, but then it's got this sort of airplane stunt casting thing, like where it's like, oh, why is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar the airline pilot? And this is the same kind of thing where they're just putting in these familiar faces, like having Jamie Farr in the movie is kind of like a punchline. And again, if you didn't live through the 80s, it's kind of difficult to explain where he was in the culture, but on the edge of it by now. And so it was like it's sort of like a real TV network would be doing, where they're sort of drafting these sort of fringe stars to come be the stars.
The stars who don't have anything better to do on Christmas.
Yeah, on Christmas, that's right. John Houseman, that was perfect. And then so that gets you into the movie. Our introduction to Frank Cross is he's sort of watching these promo spots with his team, and he hates the promo for Scrooge, for the Christmas Carol adaptation that they're doing, because, as he says, you've got America's favorite old fart sitting by the fireplace with a book. Who wants to watch that? And Bobcat Goldthwait in the room as Loudermilk, Elliot Loudermilk, as one of the two Bob Cratchits we'll talk about in the movie. He says, well, actually, sir, the movies, a lot of people, we've seen the numbers. A lot of people want to watch this, And he's pointing out, hey, this promo is doing gangbusters. Everybody's going to watch this on Christmas Eve. and that leads us into the promo that Frank Cross has in mind, which I really talking about is not going to do it justice. But this is where the movie is weirdly ultra violent, but if you look back to the 80s and the 90s, and really the America in general for the last 50 years, so is our culture. And the movie it's an explicit sort of recognition that we live in a time, even then, of acid rain and psycho killers and all of these scary things. And he's like, now more than ever, when somebody can randomly shoot you on the road, you need to get in the Christmas spirit, and that's why you can't afford to miss Scrooge. He's like, his point being that the numbers are showing this, that people want to watch it, but we want to make them so afraid to miss this that they will tune in, and that's the way we're introduced to Frank Cross. He is going to make people scared to death that they are going to miss this. And literally, as we find out, once he starts airing his promo every half hour on the hour, it actually kills an old lady, which he celebrates because of the incredible publicity they'll get out of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I remember in the 80s was when the conversation started about your local news is trying to scare the crap out of you to watch it all the time. Yeah. National news never quite took the same hit because they actually had things to talk about. But, you see it day in and day. I watch a lot of local news, unlike most people of my generation, but they really do tell you, coming up at 10, we're going to tell you why your kids are drinking lead at school. We're going to tell you why the COVID vaccine isn't going to work. We're going to tell you, it's constantly, if you miss this broadcast, someone's going to die.
Yeah.
And it had really and it's never gone away. And yet Americans still totally, take it hook, line, and sinker, which I frankly don't understand, but because we should all be aware, we should all understand how the media works at this point. The thing of the lady dying years later, it was the first thing. This movie was the thing that popped into my head when I found out about it. When Frankenstein came out in 1932, somebody died in the theater. And so it became this whole thing of, well, this movie's so scary, it'll kill you. And so they started sending, I don't think they did this all over the country, but in like New York and California, I believe they were sending nurses to theaters to go sit there in the lobby as if you would need a nurse if you're going to see this movie, because you could just drop dead.
May require medical attention.
Yeah. So, it's, you see the beat and you think like, oh, he's human for like a beat. And then he's like, this is terrific. And it's a huge punchline from what you've seen from the character so far. One of my favorite lines really is when he's going through and he's just seen the Scrooge trailer they put together, and he looks at the Picasso and he's like, "Mother." But yeah, they really do a good job, much as the novel or novella does of Christmas Carol, of setting up Ebenezer Scrooge is a reprehensible guy. He's throwing people out of their homes on Christmas. That's his job. That's what he has chosen to do for a living, and he takes pleasure in it.
Yes.
Well, he takes a level of pleasure in it, but you also find out what a miserable life he has, which, I think two things when I hear about the criticism of it. One, I think the film reviewers had never actually read Christmas Carol and were like basically mentally referring to the Disney version. And two, this movie was just ahead of them. I think the critics were thinking, oh, we're going to get a comedy because it's starring a comedian, and I'm expecting something light and frothy. And because that isn't what it delivered, they lost their minds. It didn't fit within the box that they were expecting it to fit within. Like RoboCop kind of got away with it because it was just like they were just so overwhelmed by what was happening on screen, and they didn't really know what to expect. But this movie, they had an idea in their head of, well, I thought Bill Murray would just kind of be a funny guy going through the motions with ghosts, and that's not what it delivered.
It's not. And I think you're right, because one of the things I'm like, look, is this Bill Murray being Bill Murray? It is, but it's Bill Murray being really mean. And we hadn't seen Bill Murray we'd seen Bill Murray be a wise ass. Mm-hmm. Really hadn't seen him be an asshole like he is in this movie, where he is. And it's not even that he's just like, because you've seen him be sort of a playful dick to people. I mean, even on SNL, we saw that. But he's a despicable human being in this movie to a level that's almost over the top. He yells at children. And is almost physically violent with them, grabbing them by the, grabbing him by our young tiny Tim, not Mary Lee Retton, but the tiny Tim stand-in here. He grabs the little boy by the scuff of his collar and shakes him. And so you see him, and he says, "Why are you wasting time with homeless people? Why are you helping these people? He wants to fire the volunteers at the homeless shelter." He's like, and Claire's like, "They're volunteers." He fires, and of course, this sets up what happens with Elliot Loudermilk's arc. He fires Elliot Loudermilk on Christmas Eve, and sets a new record for getting him out the door. The movie tells you this is something he does regularly, because Grace, the other Bob Cratchit, and we'll talk about, there's really two Bob Cratchits, Grace and Elliot Loudermilk. He sets it up so that when she gets on the phone to basically change the locks and throw him out and have security see him out the door, she says, "Hey, this is Code 9, Elliot Loudermilk." And so we understand that this is something he does all the time. And I think he even watches it with a telescope, and he's like celebrating a new record for kicking someone out the door in under 4 minutes.
And I can see how people saw, I mean, you also walk into the movie knowing he will be redeemed at the end.
Yes.
And so it's a little bit of bullshit to say, "Oh, he's so bad, I don't know if I can it's like, well, he's obviously going over the top, but at the same time, so did the real Scrooge.
Right.
He was really kicking people out of their houses on Christmas. He's, so it's, I don't know. I when he's to me, kind of the epitome of who he is as a character and why it's funny is when Grace has the picture her kid drew up on the wall, and he's like, "How many fingers does Mrs. Claus have?" She's like, 11. And he's like, "Yeah, I know. It's crap. I don't want it on my wall." And you're like, well, no sane human says that.
Well, he rips down the picture that her child made.
Yeah.
He knows her child made that. He rips it down and wads it up and throws it away. It is like, it's one of those despicable things, like no sane human would do what he just did. But it sets it up where he's just merciless in everything he does. And let's set this up. So everybody knows the story of this movie, but there are some departures that I think are important. And one of them is that we get not one, but two Bob Cratchits. One is Elliot Loudermilk. He is the junior TV executive who objects to Frank Cross's promo, his deadly promo. Now, by the way, this promo is really bad. It has someone screaming from acid rain. It has the explosion head on, a huge screen-filling explosion of a plane that is blown up by terrorists. And then it has "and freeway killers." And you have a first-person view of someone sticking a shotgun in your face and pulling the trigger. So this isn't just like, it's not just intimating at violence. This is like a faces of death level of violence on a television promo intended for families. It is really over the top. And so you're really building a portrait of a guy who will fire somebody at the drop of a hat, who makes incredibly visceral, disgusting, violent promos and puts that on television for families. And a guy who won't even, who tells his secretary on Christmas Eve, "Oh yeah, that bonus you were expecting, you're not getting." So Elliot Loudermilk is one of the Bob Cratchits, the fired television executive, and Grace is the movie makes clear, his long-suffering personal assistant, secretary, who has a large extended family at home with with her grandmother and her kids in a single room apartment, and with a young son who can't talk. His young son was traumatized by witnessing the death of his own father, and he's been mute ever since. And that's our Tiny Tim. Grace is our other stand-in for Bob Cratchit, because you see through the movie that even though she has been loyal and helpful, and basically his right hand, Frank Cross's right hand, she gets no grace either from him, and is just long suffering, also a victim of his cruelty.
Yeah. I mean, they don't get into why she hasn't changed jobs, but you can kind of imagine how hard it would be for her to actually do. And those scenes are also, they end up playing, the same thing of him visiting and seeing the family frivolity, but they don't have him say, as Scrooge does, but they don't have anything. Why are they actually happy? But you can see all of that, and that's kind of where Murray, as an actor, has some deftness, and you're able to do things on film that you can't do in a book, where you can just see kind of him processing everything he's seeing, of like, oh, this kid, there's nothing wrong with this kid. He just doesn't talk. He's a smart little kid who's functional, but he needs some help. And it's a sweet, little, sequence in there. And of course you also get Grace kind of venting a little bit about him, but Frank Cross doesn't exist that much within the space of their house. He is what he is, but Grace doesn't really bring it home, I guess is what I'm saying.
That's right.
Which is the kind of the same thing of, Bob Cratchit kind of defends Scrooge, at least as the founder of the feast. Even as people, grumble a little bit about, all Grace gets is the towel, right?
Yeah, she gets the towel. And that's the other thing, is you see him very early in the movie working with Grace, his sort of back and forth with Grace. Grace can speak up to him, and Grace has the ability and the will to actually say, what are you doing, Frank? Mm-hmm. When Frank is going through the gifts, he's going to give certain people, he's either giving them a towel, an embroidered towel with the IBC logo on it, or he's giving them a VCR. And just so people understand, in 1988, getting a VCR, that was an expensive gift. That was pretty amazing. And they did DVDs and Laserdisc were not widely available. They were quite expensive back then. So VCR was sort of the video recording coin of the realm back then. And that was his other gift, but only a few people, basically people he's kissing up to, were getting the VCR. And he's going down the list of people who are getting one and not the other. And he gives Grace a towel. He also gives his own brother a towel. And of course, you find out later that Grace vetoed that. Grace said, no, you're getting a VCR, and she did that behind his back. And we find that out later. Yeah.
And if he doesn't, it's nothing to him. Like, he's network president. He could have easily given the VCR
to everybody. Yeah. But he's giving the towel, almost, you get the implication he's giving the towel to sort of stick it to you too. It's like, hey, you get a gift that's not even a gift. It's sort of just this crap that I'm bestowing on you.
It's the swag from the closet.
Right. Be glad I even bother to do this is the thing. But you mentioned something that I want to cover. Is like, I think, again, it's an incredible satire of American, of this sort of media landscape, but it's also the thing this movie gets right, and you see it with the casting of people like Goldthwait and with Grace's name, Alfre
Woodard,
Bill Murray, of course, and then Karen Allen. The performances in this movie are really, really good, and the only way this movie gets away with any kind of redemption is because of Bill Murray's, and it's not in the script, it's his empathy. You see the way he reacts once he's going through his ghostly visits. You see him change. and you see he's not the Bill Murray of old, the sort of rascal with the heart of gold. He doesn't have that. He's got to get there, and he's got to go on that journey. And to Murray's credit, he actually does that work. This is one of his best performances. He is really, really good. And the cast that's around him is also just, in most cases, flawless.
Yeah. I mean, the Alfre Woodard, of course, has gone on to, wide acclaim and all that. And it's kind of interesting to see her kind of at this really early part of what would become kind of her more public career. Bobcat Goldthwait was kind of known prior to this. I mean, he's gone on to just kind of be an eccentric in LA who occasionally produces some really crazy and fun media. But this was kind of after he had done he was doing this thing as like a stand-up and in some other movies where you could barely understand him and he was this wild man, but it's not actually how he talks. I guess either he got speech therapy or he was faking it all along. I never knew which was true. Yeah. But he's kind of perfect in his space here. Karen Allen, I can go off on for about half an hour, but we know her pretty much as Marion Ravenwood from the Indiana Jones movies. Mm-hmm. And this is really one of the only, aside from Animal House, one of the only other things that I really associate her with. And she kind of does both the stands in for Belle, but also it gives Murray the chance to do the Scrooge has the speech of are there no prisons, are there, for the surplus population? And that's essentially what he's saying to, he's saying to her, in his like, we'll just brush him off. And then you get to, of course, see the tragedy of what that would actually look like if she took him up on the advice later on in the movie. But yeah, she's absolutely phenomenal in this.
She's great. And then, and obviously there's a bunch of little, I think, Robert Mitchum is great as Bill Murray's boss. He's really in almost the what's his name? Leslie Nielsen, mm-hmm. Sort of like the airplane role of the sort of clueless old guy, who's sort of been the sort of clueless, benevolent old guy who is sort of, it gives a wonderful lecture to Frank about pets and the growing importance of pets on TV, pets watching TV, and that pretty soon the pets will be their own independent television audience of 25 million pets watching television, and we've got to start putting something in there for them. And of course, that's why we get the dormice with the antlers glued to their heads in the television adaptation of Scrooge.
And I think that there's anyone who's had kind of a boss who you have to say yes to,
right,
knows exactly what that is. But I think in particular in media, it was such a like network note joke, in joke of like, well, aren't there dormice in this? It's like, well, there aren't, but there always should have been. It's like, that's how Frank's gotten by. That's kind of how the media world works. And they're not afraid to poke at it. And of course, then all the trouble that causes to the production of having to staple the antlers onto the mice. But yeah, Mitchum was an interesting choice, partially because Mitchum's reputation of both in the movies and in real life was kind of being a dangerous dick swinging, like he was a lot. And particularly as he got older, he just had no time for anyone's crap. So he saw something in this script that he really liked. He didn't need to do this at this point.
Nobody did. That's the thing. It's like there's all these people in this movie, and you're like, it's just like they're just doing it because they can.
Yeah.
There's so much money on the screen in this movie.
Oh yeah, for the time it came out for a comedy, I think it was like 36 million, which was really a pretty good chunk of change for a movie back then. And it looks like a big glossy. And when I hear it was actually mostly filmed in LA, it kind of blows my mind. I guess they just have sets that look that good in LA, but
Yeah. It's a very New York movie. I mean, it looks like a very New York movie. So yeah, I didn't realize that it was filmed almost entirely in LA.
Yeah. What else is in your notes, man?
I want to talk for sure about just building off the performances. I think a weak spot of a lot of film adaptations of Scrooge is a ghost. And that's not the case here. The ghosts here are, and I think building off kind of what we saw in Ghostbusters. And so, I mean, they really put that money, speaking of money on the screen, they really did a lot with visual effects and makeup to make ghosts that were really scary and were very distinct from one another, had a lot of personality, funny, scary, and very visually striking. I thought all three ghosts in this movie, I say 4, Lou Hayward, who starts, is a very visually decomposed body wearing a golfer outfit. He died on the 18th green and was, I guess, buried in his golf clothes. And he comes to visit our hero, anti-hero, Frank Cross. He doesn't even have any eyes. It's gross. Actually, looking at this guy, it is grody.
That was when you talk about like the kind of the tone being kind of popping all over. I remember seeing this in the theater the first time and having the thought of, right, this is a ghost story. I guess it's going to be a little creepy. It was creepier than I was expecting it to be.
That's right. Yeah.
And I at this point I've seen the movie 25 times, so there's zero impact of him coming on screen, but this was, I think, part of how they ended up getting nominated for best makeup that year.
Yes, absolutely. They had 5 nominations, mostly in visual effects and makeup and sound, I think. Right? There was technical, and that's on the screen. It's a very well done movie visually, and it's not cringe, as the kids would say. For its time, these are very impressive visual effects. And it convincing, and it kind of has to be. I loved all the ghosts here. Starting with him, you see him sort of like, you see Lou is getting impatient with Frank Cross, because Frank Cross doesn't even. He's notably very calm. For the first time he sees this guy walks in, pours himself a scotch. And he's just sort of like, what's going on? Now he's still disturbed. He gets a gun out. And that's one of the things I love about this movie is, like, sometimes the ghosts are just used as a framing device. It's not just a framing device with this movie. Each of these ghosts, he's interacting with them in a way that makes sense based on what he's seeing. So, and when Lou comes to see him, he sees this ghost. Well, he's like, it's not a ghost. He looks like a freaking zombie dead body, and he shoots it full of holes. He takes the gun out, shoots a ghost full of holes, and Lou is drinking scotch, and you see the scotch come out of the holes in his body. It's a funny gag. He is like, going back to like the sort of like, 40s and 50s, Warner Brothers cartoons where you see the liquid pouring out of the holes. It's funny, but it's also very visceral and physical in a way that a lot of these other Ghost and Christmas Carol adaptations, other than the future, which is always sort of a personification of death, they don't have a lot of personality. It's just sort of like, okay, time for the next ghost. They do a great job both individuating the ghost and then allowing Murray to really riff off of that. A lot of his work in this movie is very improvisational, and it gives depth and a believability to those interactions that I think isn't true for a lot of Christmas Carol adaptations.
Yeah, I know what you mean about kind of stepping through the, like, okay, they're going to meet this person, they're going to meet that person, and
right.
And it can leave it feeling a little. It's kind of funny. A couple of years before COVID, we went to Zach Scott Theater here in town to go see Christmas Carol, and Jamie was actually pretty reluctant. She wasn't really interested in going, She said, well, the story's so boring. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She said, well, like one of the only good versions of it is Scrooge. And I was like, what are you talking about? But that was why. I mean, really, I think it's because those are the kind of versions she's seen where, yeah, I mean, it's really
A Wonderful Life. It's like, hey, I'm just going to show you the stuff that's in your life, but there's not a real relationship between Scrooge and the ghost.
Yeah. Or even Scrooge necessarily reacting to what he's seeing.
That's right.
Yeah. And he does here.
He really does. The ghosts are very funny, and each of them has their own sort of deal. You know, the Ghost of Christmas Past is a cab, which is a really cool riff that I think you see in the by the way, the Percy Jackson movies resurrect the sort of crazy cab going through time kind of thing. And you see David Johansen, our aforementioned one-time lead singer of the New York Dolls. He is kind of like a Tom Waits sort of rascal in this movie, showing Frank his past, but there's a lot of visual gags and fun. Like he's sort of bringing him through and really interacting with him, and like it's his own thing. He says, feel free to smoke, fine, smoke, and there's smoke coming out of his ears. The cab, there's just a lot going on that isn't just showing Frank his Christmases past. But you see that too. You see Frank with his dad. His dad buys him a $80 cut of veal, or what would today's dollars be $80? You also see Frank pushing and pulling, just like you see in A Christmas Carol, where he's arguing. He's very argumentative with the ghost, saying, "Hey, I see a man who's showing his son the ways of the world early on. You got to learn early," and that's very much from the original. But the ghosts are just very tactile. And very, especially Carol Kane, who is, again, and I think this is part of the critic's point, very violent with Frank beating him and Terry. I mean, at one of the notes of research I saw, her deal is that she is going to beat some sense into Frank Cross, and she does. And again, sort of bringing up those old, was it Tex Winter cartoons? The sort of like
Tex Avery,
Tex Avery cartoons, where it's very visual. I'm going to drop an anvil on your head. I'm going to punch you. I'm going to throw you down the stairs. Three Stooges kind of humor. There's visual. They actually make a reference to Three Stooges. So there's very much that interplay with the Ghost of Christmas Present. So that's really well done. What one of the things I love here is that for the Ghost of Christmas Present, they take him to see what's going on with Grace's family, and you see him sort of learn about Grace and her family, including her young son. But you also see his brother, or actually brothers. In the party where they're playing Trivial Pursuit, which is a very 80s thing to do at parties, is play Trivial Pursuit. And her brother gets you could tell they sort of spell out the differences between them. He did not watch, his older brother Frank watched nothing but TV, for the first 15 years of his life. Younger brother might not have, because he gets the question wrong about the SS Minnow. That was the ship that went on the 3-hour tour and stranded Gilligan's Island. There's a great callback to that later on in the movie. I just thought they set things up well. This is a very, for a movie that's plotted in advance, you're hitting all the same beats. They do some new stuff in this framework that is really well done. Yeah,
there's some stuff that in the novel, or in the book, Fred, and I can't remember his wife's name in the book, and there's a lot made about how he's kind of like married below his station, and now Fred's not living as well as he could. He's kind of like middle class now instead of upper middle class. And of course, in Victorian England, you can imagine all the scandal of all of it. But in this, what they do is he's basically like, he never really says it outright. He says like, you and your cool friends or whatever, but you see where they're living, and they're basically redoing, New York in the 80s is coming out of New York in the 70s. And if you know about New York in the 70s, you know, it was not a great place. Everything was kind of falling apart. So they never say anything about it. But if you look in the back, like the walls are crumbling in that apartment that they're in. These are clearly like the first people who are homesteading into an older part of town, which you know is going to eventually lead to other things. But these are like cool, hip, young people who are concerned, probably. I'm doing air quotes here. And that's something Frank has no time for, including they don't make a huge deal out of it. You kind of have to know where it's coming from the book. And the Patrick Stewart film you referenced does, I think, a beautiful job of it. In this film, he's like, "Hi, Wendy." Like, he's never acknowledged his brother's wife here. Mm-hmm. And as in the novel, he finally like acknowledges his nephew's wife. And to me, that's actually like a really stirring moment. It's there's a lot of subtlety there, to what he's actually overcome. You get a lot of idea of course, she's always wanted him, to make, if for no other reason, she knows how miserable Frank's brother has been because Frank doesn't give him what he needs as a brother. And so she's mad at Frank because of that. You only get a couple lines about it in this movie. But you can kind of extrapolate what all of that's going to mean going forward for he and his brother.
And it enriches the ending when you actually see him sort of say, "Hey," acknowledge Wendy and acknowledge like the brother, and sort of say, "Hey," and sort of admit, "Hey, the VCR wasn't me. That was Grace." And of course they're all amazed because they don't know how he knew the trivia question or knew the VCR thing, because of course he visited there as it goes. That's one of the great things about the way this movie is structured, and the way it sort of calls back to that is that you see in the novella, but you don't see in a lot of adaptations. I think the Patrick Stewart adaptation is the best straight adaptation I've seen of A Christmas Carol. And that's why I enjoyed so much watching them back to back with my son. But I love Scrooge. I think Scrooge is probably my second favorite movie adaptation of the movie.
Yeah, there's a really good George C. Scott one that goes straight horror.
Yeah. The George C. Scott one is good.
But yeah, I think, and the interesting thing about the Patrick Stewart one is because he'd done the stage show as a one-man show for so long. But I think by the time they were like, well, we're not going to, bring that to TNT. No one's going to watch you by yourself on a black stage. He understood the story so well. He knew what to bring to it. You can also, by the way, go out there, audience. The last time I air quote read the book, it was the Patrick Stewart version. So go out to Audible and find it. It's usually just a couple of bucks. But it's
the Mickey Mouse one is good too. We should say the Disney Mickey Mouse Christmas Carol is great
with Peg Leg Pete at the end.
I love it. I mean, it is what it is, but it's like I really like it. I think it's really well done.
I think if you're going to start your kids off kind of like getting them familiar with the story, it's hard to do better. Yeah, it's really, really good. But yeah, I mean, I really like Carol Kane in this. I did read that apparently she had some trauma from having to actually do those scenes over and over. And she really did end up hitting Murray a number of times.
And tore his lip, they said. The time where she's like pulls his lip down, she apparently really tore his lip, and they had to postpone filming for a few days while he recovered from that.
I mean, I do remember like I understood the cartoonishness of the violence when I saw it the first time. And she's blowing the glitter, X on his face. It's all, as you said, very Tex Avery. And then of course you get into the final ghost, and you have kind of the false start by the guy who's coming down on the elevator. And I freaking love that scene.
Love it.
Yeah. Love it. But when he does show up, I also love how they first introduced that ghost creeping up. We didn't even say he's playing Scrooge TV or the movie within a movie. It's Buddy Hackett of all people.
Oh gosh,
which was a huge punchline at the time.
Well, it's such an old TV production. That's what's kind of cool about it. It's like having Mickey Rooney in there or something like that. You know,
Yeah.
It's like this, like everybody there was relevant at an earlier time. These are all 70s, 60s, 50s television stars that they're sort of resurrecting and throwing into this movie within a movie. At the same time, what I love about it is you see the money they're spending on the TV production as well and sets. It's really like they're spending a crap ton of money. Like I said, the money's in the movie. Well, the money's in the TV movie too. You could tell they're really going all out with this thing.
Well, I think the budget they state for that was actually higher than the budget for the movie.
Yeah. I spent $40 million on this because they're, of course, having this they're panning out to South Africa,
the Great Barrier Reef.
Yeah, exactly. They're really going all out, but it does sound like one of those things where they're like, no, this is literally going to be for everyone. We're going to have something in here for literally everyone, and it's going to be the television event of the holiday.
Well, it's and people forget too. I mean, cable in 88 existed, of course, and had for 10 years.
It did,
but that was back when you had like the Cable Ace Awards. Like that was cable was crap. And there were 3 networks, in PBS. And that was it. It was, you were going to be watching one of the 3 channels at that point. I mean, we didn't watch TV on Christmas Eve, but that was all that was really out there. So, I mean, you really could have captured literally like a third of the country at that point if you'd wanted to. But yeah, anyway, I think, as they get to the ending, I did not know until 20 minutes before we started recording that basically they didn't know Murray was going to do what he did. That became the ending. It makes sense. But I don't know exactly what the ending was intended to be, but I guess Murray just started going off on this rant and Donner was just like, let the cameras roll. And at the end, one of the writers was like, what the hell is this Jim Jones stuff? And I guess Donner just hit him so hard he left a bruise on the guy's arm because Donner knew what he'd just gotten on film. But I remember seeing that and thinking how crazy that was. I also think it's a really interesting insight into Murray himself, because if he was really, I mean, I've always thought this movie, as I've gotten older and kind of know about kind of the course of where Bill Murray ended up, like, these days Murray is known for like showing up. If he happens to be in a hotel and there's a wedding, he's going.
Yeah.
He shows up at South by and takes over bars, and like he's the bartender that night. He's made it kind of his life's goal to be a delight to other people. He at some point processed, the best thing I can do is make people happy by just showing up. That's the gift he can kind of give to people. I'm sure he does other things, but I don't think he's like out there, like doing signings at cons or something like that. But he's kind of figured out how to kind of be this presence in a way that other actors and talent just don't really embrace. And you'd also see him go through the same thing. Jamie, when we were watching it yesterday, was like, well, this is a lot like Groundhog Day, of him kind of going from bastard to being a good guy.
It is, yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I think he also, because he fought with Donner and the writers through the filming of this, that was his big falling out with Harold Ramis, was on Groundhog Day. And I don't know if they got what he was on about, of what he was trying to drive the characters to be like. And you don't really get much insight into where he really wants to end up with these things, because the only thing I've seen that he had full control over is the Netflix Christmas special.
Yeah.
Which is, I love the Netflix Christmas special.
I do too. Wait, worth noting that the principal writer of this movie, Mitch Glazer, also helmed that. And
Really?
And he's also a Dickens guy. He did a very successful version of Great Expectations as well, I believe.
Interesting.
So he is Mitch Glaser, and he is in the scenes of the party with his brother. So where they're playing the game, Mitch Glaser is in that, and so he has not done a lot of stuff. He, like, in terms of his IMDb, the things he's been in are things that he had a lot of interest in, which apparently is Dickens, and he's a good friend of Bill Murray. So he actually, if you look at his IMDb, it's actually kind of sparse, but he is Dickens appears to be one of his passions, and the other is he's done a lot of stuff with Bill Murray. So he's one of Bill Murray's, I guess, writer friends.
Yeah. Oh, you wanted to talk about whether or not the movie kind of earned the ending, and I wanted to have you.
Well, so this is one of the things that I think, again, the movie does well, and I think the movie takes advantage of visual effects and technology that just wasn't possible in other movies. What you see in this movie is their treatment of the ghost is that not only are the ghosts compelling and visceral, but they also it's a little bit more squishy between what's real and what's not. So the ghosts in a lot of adaptations, the ghosts show up at his house when he's alone, and then they take him off. That's not what's happening in Scrooge. They're showing up and interrupting his life as he's living it. And that's a big change. And it's something that really, because it gives us an opportunity to experience what's happening to Frank Cross. He's losing his mind in real time. And other people, other characters who know Frank Cross are watching him change and really lose his mind along with the audience. And that's very different than a lot of adaptations. And I think it's one of the things that makes this adaptation really successful is that you see him losing it and sort of really not just learning, because they're, a very special lesson. He learned his lesson. It isn't just the fact that he experiences that he gets new perspective on his past and on the lives of others in the present, but you really see him fraying at the edges. And so by the time he reaches that manic, insane ending where he goes off in that extended monologue, you feel what he's coming out of and what he feels like he's won. He isn't just changing his life. He's gotten his life back from where it was going, which is he's been through a mind fuck, really. Pardon my French, but he's been through a lot of stuff. And some of that is some of that's very funny. Where, like, when you see he thinks a waiter is on fire and throws water on him, or he sees the eyeball in the cup, you see this lame, my lacrosse coach told me there is no I in TEAM, which is so lame, but then it's followed by the waiter putting a glass of water down that has an eyeball in it. So you see him losing it and the squishiness between reality and what's really going on. And that never as much as when the last ghost arrives and you see the first ghost is not the ghost. He thinks he keeps mistaking real people as the ghost. And so that's like, he knows what's coming. And that's a great TV bit. It's like the dramatic irony where it's not the ghost, but he thinks it is because of what he's going through. He's the unreliable narrator. When you see as you say, when he sees the fake movie within a movie, the Scrooge ghost of Christmas Future, he thinks that's the ghost, and it turns out not to be. And later, when the real, much scarier ghost of Christmas Future shows up, he thinks it's a bit. So you're really in the same boat as Frank Cross. You don't know what's going to happen next. And you really are put through the ringer as he is, not just through the ghost, but through Loudermilk, who comes back to as a mass shooter, by the way. Basically comes in as somebody with a shotgun who shoots up the workplace. Again, you sort of think, oh, that feels very modern. Folks, this was happening in the 80s. And so it's like enough that it's a joke in the 80s that there are highway shooters and mass shooters coming and people going, losing their jobs and then coming back and returning to work. So he's been through a lot by the time you get to his final redemption. And that's, to me, that's what you really feel it, is because of how visceral and how crazy what he's been going through really is.
Yeah, it to me, I did see in some of the reviews they were saying, he doesn't earn it by the end, and I was like, I don't really know what. It's easy to say something like that. It's also like, yeah, but what would he have had to do in your book in order to get to that point?
Yeah.
Because in the original thing, like you were saying, he argues with the ghosts pretty much right up until the point that he realizes, and this is the one thing they don't really do in this that I think is important to the original book that a lot of them skip over because it's a drag of a part of the novella, is where they're like, he doesn't, ironically does not know that it's his stuff being, parsed out between his charwoman and whoever the creepy guy is. But it's he doesn't quite get all of the, like, no one gave a shit about him other than no one shows up for his funeral.
That's right. You get the funeral bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I do think that that's kind of a key part of him kind of realizing it's an Ozymandias moment of, I so what that I obtained all this wealth. No one cares. And they're all laughing at me after I'm dead. Yeah. There's going to be a good brunch at my funeral. It's the joke, in Christmas Carol. And this doesn't quite have that. And I think it could have probably stood to have, I know it's a long movie at 97 minutes, but it probably could have stood to have another minute tacked on of that kind of stuff. I think the stuff with Karen Allen is very impactful because you get, like, he also did damage, like he damaged people who were helping.
Yeah.
But I do kind of wish they would have tucked that scene in. I do think, though, by the time he ends up at the very end, he's seen as he's supposed to, past, present, future. He's, knows how he got there and kind of what's going on now and what he has to do to change. Does he ask in this version if things are locked in or if he has the ability to change? Because I also think that that's a fairly important thing from the book that I think even the Disney version does.
It's a little, he does say that. So he does say, hey, this can still be changed. He does that in the part when, he does that in both the future and the present. So okay. He has that. He's like, that's really, he's trying to drag he's trying to keep his casket from going into the fire, and it's literally, you see him then transposed into the casket itself, and he's burning alive. But earlier he's like, well, hey, we can still fix this. We can still with the kiddo, with the little boy. He's like, when later you see in the Ghost of Christmas Future, you see the little boy has grown up to be a teenager, but he's in an asylum and he's in a padded cell, straitjacket, all that sort of stuff. And he's like, well, this doesn't have to happen. This doesn't have to be, we can still change this.
Yeah.
So you do see that, but I agree. The movie is wishy-washy there, where I feel like if you see like another adaptation, like the Patrick Stewart, or you read the book, it's very explicit. He is very much, he's more, they spend more time driving that home, that really, especially the Ghost of Christmas Future, where he sees the little Tiny Tim has died, or he sees his own, he understands his own death. He thinks, well, this can still be changed, and it's much more. And that's, of course, that's his whole thing about when he wakes up and throws open the shutters of the house and tell me what day it is, boy.
Yeah.
And where ironically the movie within a movie does that. You're sort of seeing the movie within a movie do some of that work that the movie itself is not. Mm-hmm. And it also gets a little squishy because of the homeless guy, right? Well, he really dies.
Yeah.
So it's the Ghost of Christmas Future. He's showing in the Christmas Future. Well, that's a part he couldn't change. And I think that's a weird kind of grace note too. Like I didn't know whether I liked that or whether I didn't, but you see him show up among the ghosts later. And it's like this kind of like where it's like hyper reality, but it's still reality. There's some things you can't undo.
Right.
And some choices are yours, but some choices are others. And you can't really change what they're doing. I think that gets at one of the other things that I think the reading of the end of the movie and sort of like where I think, is it earned, is it not, is kind of a red herring. It's a movie that asks what kind of people get to be good in society. And it's like you almost have to be crazy to be someone who is working for others. And that's like sort of what it's getting. It's everybody else. It isn't just Frank that's bought into the, I've got to have everything better, faster, more expensive. I've got to, even his brother is part of a gentrifying New York. Everybody's trying to make it. And the people who aren't are kind of, that's where you sort of understand, well, did he redeem his life, or did he just lose his mind so thoroughly that now he's a flawed human being who's actually got a warped sense of thing. Now he thinks it's only a crazy person that can think only of others. And I think that's sort of what you're getting at, is like, can you only feel this way once a year, or can you really afford to change your life and be as the movie says, the kind of human we wish we were? And I think so it's not just him, but it's also Claire. Claire never marries. Claire doesn't make any money. Claire works in this shelter, and all of her energy goes to that. And I think the movie makes the point. We're putting a lot on good people. We're asking the good people in the world to do too much, and we're not meeting them halfway. So to me, that's kind of the message of the movie, is like, and that's capitalism in general, right? Are there no poorhouses? Are there no orphanages? Well, there are, but you're not helping. You're there. You're free riding on the charity of others, and I think that's something I think this movie does a really good job of bringing home. Is that it isn't just, oh, I'm going to be good now. It really takes some time to really interrogate, well, what does it mean to be good in a society where everyone is, and not just Scrooge, is callous and compromised?
Yeah, I often find the disconnect between people. I mean, this is the non-religious Christmas story, right? I mean, this is it. It's this, and It's a Wonderful Life increasingly, but the people understand, they watch this, but we walk away from it, and we're back to everyone freaking out because they can't get the best toy for Christmas because of supply chain issues or whatever. And it's like, but that shouldn't be the focus,
right,
at all. And to me, I mean, we all kind of want to sympathize and empathize with Scrooge at the end of his journey. Go, well, he needed to get to that point. It's like, yeah, but I think that's one of the things the book took place when it took place. And so, it's not like Scrooge was going to buy a newspaper and start publishing, instead they say these are the good deeds he then went forward to do as he lived many more years.
Because that's the question you have. And that's that the book tries to answer, is like, well, how lasting is this?
Yeah.
And it's really hard, because in one version of this world, right, is that he just, once he feels safe again, he just reverts back to who he is. And one version is he really is forever changed, because some parts of this feel like a fantasy, like what Elliot came in and shot up the place. Are we just going to forget that? Does he get his job back? He just came in with a gun and shot the place up.
Yeah, he just held the control room at shotgun point for he's doing some time.
I mean, Put a Little Love in Your Heart's a great song. It's not that great. We're not going to forget that you just came in to shoot up the control room, and there's the violence is not so subtle in this movie. And same thing with Frank. Is he going to keep his job? I mean, obviously they try to make the point that he takes the special, and he takes the movie over the top to a place where only Bill Murray could take it, and it's wonderful. But it's mostly Murray doing that, and so that's how is this sustainable? Is a good question.
Yeah. I mean, it's a movie, and I think at the end of the day, we're supposed to assume, that he is, through his message, because you see at the end while they're singing the song, Robert Mitchum and his wife dancing with their cats in the living room. By the way, Robert Mitchum was right about the mice. So
he was,
which was, I think, one of the best laugh. It was a good little subtle laugh that they threw in. But I think the idea, of course, but I think, kind of writ large for all of us is we're, and probably we'll end up doing a version of Christmas Carol almost every year as we do Christmas movies. I think that's really the question at the end is how are you going to, Scrooge doesn't just take care of Tiny Tim. He is a friend to all men, at the end of the book. Right. And we get the idea that that's what Frank Cross is going to try and do as probably president of the network. And as Scrooge was like, well, maybe I won't be throwing people out of their houses quite as quickly and, trying to make that kind of profit. And I think I like to think that this went on, and he actually earns that Humanitarian of the Year award that he is given at the beginning of this movie at some point. But I think for the audience, Christmas Carol can and should be, there's a reason it endures as a story.
Yeah.
But maybe taking a little more seriously as to what it's actually trying to say, and not just, that's a Christmassy thing that I put into my eyeballs every year, is maybe a good thing.
Yeah, we can't understand. I think at the end, we really want to be clear, right? We really want to believe in goodness, and we really want to believe that Frank is good now. When probably my favorite moment of the film is where he's talking to her and she shakes her head and mouths the word no, when she does that. And part of that, again, Karen Allen, she's just radiant in this movie, and it makes the movie, it pulls off the romance between them, because how can she possibly still be into this dude?
Yeah.
He's awful, but there's something there. There's something funny. There's something good about it. And you finally see it, and she's there for it. And like I say, through sheer exuberance and his manic energy, it wins. You don't know if it's sustainable, but if the audience is anybody, they're clear and kind of wanting it to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe there's something to that shot Donner put in there for looking at from behind the camera. But I doubt that was intentional, but it's definitely a read. But yeah, it's to me, I'm shocked to see, it got the bad reviews it got, that, it still is not ranked all that high on like Rotten Tomatoes and whatnot. And but
even Murray doesn't seem to like it. Murray's like, he's sort of like, I would say that Murray kind of, he sort of threw, as one of the reviews I read, that say he threw Donner under the sleigh. He said Donner's direction, but they had very different ideas about what they wanted this movie to be. But Donner has been very gracious about Murray, because, like, as you said, he knows getting Murray on film in this movie. I think it's one of Murray's best performances. You really get the full range of what he can do, not just the manic improviser, but the very. He has that thing that I think people say about Bill Murray, Eddie Murphy, which is he is very engaged on the screen, and he is performing with you instead of at you. And you really get that feeling with Murray that he is present, and he has that presence with the other performers, and he's really bringing he's the rising tide that's sort of raising all boats in this movie. I just love it. I think it's great. It is flawed, and I sort of get why it's flawed. I think the last thing that I want to say about it, though, is just a side note. 30 Rock rips this movie off to an incredible extent. And you really have to sort of, like, it's very New York. 30 Rock rips whole plot points out of this. Donaghy basically is Frank Cross. When you think about what this movie gets from what 30 Rock gets from this movie, it's even some of the tone, the sort of weird, sort of wacky satirical tone of 30 Rock. I mean, obviously some of that comes from SNL, Simpsons, and things like that. But you look back at it, it is very, or Network even, it is the workplace comedy, the television workplace comedy. It is part of that grand tradition.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suspect everyone working on this knows all of this probably feels the way it does because it's all coming from a place that was probably way more true than any of us want to know.
Yeah.
There was, I mean, like we talked about at the beginning, this is pretty reflective of TV in the 80s, and it's not too far off from what's out there now. Marshall, thank you so much. I'm really glad to have been able to do this one. To me, this movie, if we're doing Christmas canon, this would definitely be there in my list. And I was really glad when you said you wanted to do it. So
yeah, it's a longtime favorite of mine. Ryan, thanks for having me on.
Yeah. All right. Well, everybody, happy holidays. We'd love to hear from you. Do drop, notes onto the blog or hit us up on social media. I'm at Signal Watch. You can always find me on Twitter. And we hope that you enjoy it and are having a great holiday season.
Thanks, everyone.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. We'd love to hear from you, so find us online and let us know what you think. Whether you prefer email, blog comments, or social media, we'll be happy to hear from you. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind.